Bosniaks. Who are they? And why should we know? We can think of them as a societal body being influenced by other influences coming from the outside, impacting what's on the inside. To understand Bosniaks, we will go through their history. Brought back to 1352, during the time the Ottoman Empire conquered the Bosniak people. In this sense, the Ottoman introduced Islam for them as a religion. Hence, what is important to remember here is that the Bosniaks called themselves Bosniaks before the Ottoman came, referring to the location and not the religion. After more than 400 years, the time of enlightenment came, and rationalizing processes started to occur. For example, agriculture was said to be rationalized, as so was the mining industry. A road infrastructure was set to be built, while the Ottoman was helping Bosniaks to build 900 kilometers of the Kaldırma roads, which from today's perspective could be considered as old traditional roads made of stones. Also, urbanization processes started to occur, as building stores and hotels in Sarajevo, today the capital city of Bosnia. Even hospitals and pharmacies were built. Also, even if the geographical area was conquered by the Ottoman Empire, anybody was welcome to go to the hospitals, no matter religion. However, this was not the case in the schools always, because they were separating Muslim students to other students, while also introducing Turkish as a language to learn in school. Moreover, printing technology for printing newspapers was also introduced by the Ottomans to the Bosniak people. What was printed at that time was a newspaper in Bosnian, another one in Turkish, and another one in Serbian Cyrillic scripts. Worth mentioning in this context is whatever rationalizing development was going on, during the Ottoman Empire period, there was no power exercised against Christians, Serbs, or Croats, more than separating them through the educational system. This is important to remember because we will come back to it further in time. 1867, a big year for the Bosniak people. This is because a person named Benjamin von Kolayi, who came from the Austro-Hungarian kingdom, came to administer Bosnia as a nation, the people as Bosnians, and most importantly, switch control from the Ottomans to the Austro-Hungarian kingdom. This, of course, led to influences coming from the West, and their basis was to develop further what the Ottomans has been doing, for example, by advancing their agricultural system and also introducing colonization by letting Austro-Hungarian people to rent land in a foreign country, now established as Bosnia, who now with the Austro-Hungarian power got to have 138 industrial companies with employing around 52,000 workers in Bosnia, which could be considered as help coming from the West. But however, do not forget that these are capitalizing procedures occurring in Bosnia, exploiting them. Additionally, did they build roads up to 7,000 kilometers, and also they introduced a railway system, opening up for trade with the Europeans, which as a whole has been considered as not only modernization but also Europeanization, bringing Bosnia closer to the Europeans and further from the Ottoman. This could be understood in a religious way, which moves Bosnia closer to the Christianity and further from the Muslims. Remember that now when the Austro-Hungarian people have told Bosnia that they are a nation and treated them as a nation, given them a language, the Bosniaks living in this location are not homogeneous when it comes to religion. Everybody is not Christian and everybody is not Muslim, but they are treated as one homogeneous group of Bosnian people. This led, of course, to that the neighboring countries, Serbia and Croatia, who are Orthodox and Catholic, to send influences into the nation of Bosnia to their comrades that had Christianity as a belief, to tell them, You are not Muslim. You cannot be as them in Bosnia. You have to define yourself in a unique way that is not Muslim. And therefore, the segregation of Bosniaks as Muslims and Croatians and Serbs as Christians have occurred nationally inside the borders of what has become Bosnia. After the World War II, Bosnia ended up as a part of the socialist Yugoslavia, which lasted from 1945 to 1992. This meant that the presence of Bosnia diminished for the cause of generating a unified Yugoslavia. The people, however, that were living in Bosnia were acknowledged in sense of what their belief was. So either there were Orthodox Serbs, Catholic Croats, or Muslim Bosnians. Moreover, the Bosnians were not acknowledged as Bosniaks, the location they belonged to. They were instead reduced to being a religious minority as a group inside Yugoslavia, without any consideration of where they belong geographically, just where they exist contemporarily. This was the Yugoslavian policy, aiming to consolidate all the groups together to form a strong Yugoslavia. However, even if this was a good intention from Yugoslavia, it did not end well.
Moram reći ovdje otvoreno, Bosna neće ostati u krnjoj Jugoslaviji. Drugim riječima, Bosna neće i ne pristaje da ostane u velikoj Srbiji, da bude njen dio.
Why would Bosniaks see Serbia as a threat during a time when Yugoslavia wanted to consolidate groups and make them all feel bonds in between each other? This is actually a critical question for defining how Bosniaks could be understood, and therefore we will go back 50 years to understand why the party leader, Alija Izetbegović, is standing here saying that they do not want to be a part of Great Serbia. To give you a little disclaimer, Serbs are usually nationalistic, and the Muslim Bosnians are considered as victims of Serbia's nationalism. So, Bosnia as a part of Yugoslavia didn't necessarily create equality between all the nations. However, the government of Yugoslavia wanted to create an equal relationship between all the nations inside Yugoslavia, and therefore they came to what has been called climate of suppression. All of the members in Yugoslavia was enforced a new identity that was solidly representing Yugoslavia as united. Moreover, the unity was believed to create a security in between the heterogeneous populations living in Yugoslavia. So, in other words, just because you are a Christian or a Muslim, you're not supposed to fight with each other because we're all together Yugoslavians. However, even if this sounds like a good ideology that was supposed to unite everybody, it oppressed the identity of Bosnian Muslims living in Yugoslavia. So the Yugoslavian government didn't hesitate to punish people who are deviating from the Yugoslavian ideology of togetherness. Consequently, the Bosniaks, or the Muslim Bosnians, were losing their identity as Muslims and Bosniaks. One person that got punished was the political leader that we just saw, Alija Izetbegović. And this was because he wrote an Islamic declaration in 1970, which he was jailed for in 1983 when this publication got viral in Yugoslavia. He got jailed due to that this publication was strengthening a renewal of the Muslim identity inside Yugoslavia as Bosnians. So, for example, what was stated in this document was many pages, but I will just show you like an example of what kind of motivating sentences that were inscribed in this document. So, for example, we have, "It is unthinkable that a Muslim should sacrifice himself for any king or ruler, no matter who he might be, or for the glory of any nation or party, because the strongest Islamic instinct recognizes in this a kind of paganism and idolatry. A Muslim can die only in the name of Allah and for the glory of Islam, or flee the battlefield. This is a distinct example of how the Bosnian Muslims were supposed to strengthen their identity and stand up for their rights. Rights in this sense were declared by the UN General Assembly in 1960 and was furtherly defined by UNESCO as A. Having a common historical tradition, as Bosniaks have had for a long time. For example, going to the mosque and the practice of Islam as a lifestyle. B. Racial or ethnic identity. Well, they are white and they have an ethnicity as Bosniaks. C. Cultural homogeneity. They are somehow linked to each other as defining themselves as Bosniaks belonging to this area. D. Linguistic unity. They have a language. You remember the Austro-Hungarian leader Benjamin von Kolai, who came to the Bosniak area, said that this is a nation and it has a language, which is Bosnian. Furtherly, E. Religious or ideological affinity. Well, they are Muslims and they think of this area as theirs because they have been here for so long. F. Well, it's the territorial connection. And G. Common economic life. Well, they have been together as a society and functioned through centuries, so why would they not have a common economic life? According to the UN General Assembly, at least one of these needs to be fulfilled for a group of people to have the right to self-determination. Bosniaks fulfill all of them. So why was it so problematic for them to be their own nation for the Serbs? Well, it comes down to the fact that the framework for the right to have self-determination was based on people who lived in colonial states occupied by foreign countries and not like in Bosnia's case, being a minority in an existing state, Yugoslavia. Albeit, even if this was a problem throughout history, it came to change. This is because the censuses of Yugoslavia has changed during time. For example, in 1948, the Bosnians or the Bosniaks couldn't declare themselves as Bosniaks or Muslims. They had to choose either Serbs, Croats, or Yugoslavs with undeclared nationality while they were a part of Yugoslavia. So they weren't accepted as a people yet. They were literally forced to declare themselves as Yugoslavs without identity. Subsequently, they got the status of being a people in Yugoslavia, and therefore they could register themselves as Muslims, which led to a really big increase of registered Bosnians and Muslims living in the area of Bosniaks, which is considered as Bosnia during the time of Yugoslavia. This development ended up developing the Republic of Bosnia because now there were a majority of people registered as Muslims and Bosnians inside the borders of Bosnia. And remember, these people, or this increase, didn't come from nowhere. They were living there all the time, but the state apparatus censuses were oppressing them and not like inviting them to register themselves in the way they want to be identified. So the state apparatus of Yugoslavia, you could say, oppressed the Bosnian people living in Yugoslavia and prohibited them from registering their identity in the way they wished to. And this is all thanks to Josip Broz Tito and Alija Izetbegović, who enabled and motivated people to identify themselves as Muslims as well as Bosnians. As a side note, Tito was the former president of Yugoslavia, who enabled them to identify themselves as Muslims, and this was perceived as a threat from the Croats and Serbs living in the Bosnian borders, who interpreted the growth of Muslims in Yugoslavia as a growing Islamism and a Muslim nation which was perceived as a threat, turning the Croats and Serbs into minorities by claiming the rights to the historical location of Bosniaks as their. However, there was no single change made in the actual reality. It was just that the censuses were changing politically And then all of a sudden there was a lot of Muslims in this location. Especially now when the identity was so strong among the Bosnians, they were actively identifying themselves as Bosniaks. Even if I, through this video, has been speaking of Bosniaks, it has not been used actively as now. And this was to determine their territory as their Bosnian or Bosniak territory. And next step was to leave Yugoslavia. And leaving Yugoslavia was not just leaving without problems, because the Serbs and Croats had some issues with this, because there were already Croats and Serbs living inside the borders of Bosnia who were Bosnians, but due to their Christian belief settled so far away from the Muslim belief, they rather would like to be identified as Croats or Serbs living in Bosnia. So the secession from Yugoslavia was an issue of identity for the Croats and Serbs who were living inside what has become Bosnia's borders. And by Bosnian leader Alija Izetbegović wanting a sovereign state and defined it as a Muslim nation, led to that the Serbs and Croats living in Bosnia disagreed upon this due to the historical development of influences from Christianity coming from the West has collided with the Bosniaks who had Islam as belief from the East, the Ottoman. So the secession from Yugoslavia generated an identity threat against Croats and Serbs who were living in Bosnia, which also exercised a political threat against the Croats and Serbs living in Bosnia, because the political leader Alija Izetbegović wanted to make Bosnia a sovereign state independent of other nations, came unfortunately during a time when Yugoslavia was considered a weak state due to lack of social cohesion, bad economy, which has tensioned the relations inside Yugoslavia. However, do not get me wrong on this. Alija Izetbegović wanted to have a multinational and multi-religious Bosnia, but it was not interpreted in that way from the Serbs and Croats. And reasons for this could be that, for example, there was a skull tower in Serbia that was built by the Ottoman Empire as a symbol of when the Ottomans conquered Serbia. Importantly in this context is that the Ottomans were conquering Serbia and not Bosniaks who were conquered by the Ottoman Empire. But just because Bosniaks acquired the belief of Islam, it was easy for the Serbs to relate Bosniaks and Ottoman as the same conqueror that killed Serbian citizens back in time. Subsequently, the Serbian military started to produce propaganda by showing a picture of a Serbian mother holding a skull, stating that we're at war with the Turks again. And I've found some sources stating that Mujahedin was joining the Bosnian forces during the war. Thus, the military of Serbia commanded their citizens to fight to death. So the war started, the Serbs and Croats who were attacking Bosnia to diminish them, generating a genocide of Muslims to remove them from the map, from the world, while also targeting buildings such as universities, mosques, everything that was related to Bosniaks, the Ottoman Empire and Islam. What was most interesting in this case was there was two towers in Sarajevo. One was named Mumu and another one was named Uzeir. Both of them were identical to each other considering their design, and these towers acted as a symbol that the Ottoman built to symbolize the sameness of Bosnians and Serbs by naming them Mumu and Uzeir as a typically Serb and Turkish name. But due to that, the Serbs understood Bosnians as a threat. Therefore, these two towers were targeted during the war to diminish the history of Islam and Serbs. As another example, in the city named Banja Luka in Bosnia, 16 mosques were destroyed, where the main mosque, Ferhadiya, built by the Ottoman in the 16th century, was destroyed, and a car park was built there instead by the Serbs, while they directly after that rebuilt a destroyed church in the center of Banja Luka. Importantly is that this church was not destroyed by Bosniaks during history. It was during the Second World War that a movement in Croatia called Ustasha, there was a Nazi movement, who destroyed the Serbian church and not Bosniaks. Moreover, Ustasha was a notorious Nazi movement that wanted to perform genocide to purify the people living in Croatia, and this murder campaign was mostly aimed towards Serbs due to religious reasons of being Orthodox. But this was just a side note to remember that it was not the Muslim Bosniaks that had destroyed the Serbian church. It was the Croat Nazis from Ustasha. And this relationship is clarified to you to make you understand that the Bosniaks had no violence in mind throughout history, and neither now when they wanted to become an interdependent state from Yugoslavia. But their exit from Yugoslavia was understood as a threat, and therefore the Serbs wanted to rewrite history by genocide and cleansing, not only against people, but the buildings in physical space, having symbolical value, referring to the Ottoman Empire. But what happened after the war then? Well, some certain cultures emerged within the new Bosnia and Herzegovina, which just dissolved from Yugoslavia. As a whole, disturbing aggregated segregation occurred within Bosnia's borders, where the Bosniaks still live in Bosnia, and the Croats and Serbs also do, but the way they understand each other after the war has been by differentiating themselves from each other. So, as an example, the Bosniak cultural history has been to live and be identified as a Muslim, but now it's not only to be identified as a Muslim. The energy that is put into being different from the Serbs and Croats has been empowered due to the post-war effects on Bosniaks wanting to leave Yugoslavia and ending up with borders, of course, but not in the sense of how Serbia and Croatia has their borders. Namely, Serbs do have their Republic of Serbia, and the Croats have their spaces also that is considered as Croatian spaces within Bosnia's borders. So from now on, Bosnians are more interested in building mosques that look more like the Turkish mosques and not as they did before during the time the Turks were in Bosnia. So now the mosques look more like the Wahhabi style instead of the old style that was concerned as Bosniak style mosques, as in the case with Ferhadiya. So the Wahhabi style is now the way of flagging the nation of Bosniak Muslims living in Bosnia. And the same logic goes to the Serbs in the Republic of Serbia. To exemplify, we can take a story that is brought to us from 2001, when you could cross the border between the Republic of Serbia to Croatia and not to see any source of any Bosnian flag or anything that is associated with another state rather than Republic of Serbia, Serbia, or Yugoslavia. So the people living in Republic of Serbia are still emphasizing the Serbian nationhood inside what has been self-determined as Bosnia and Herzegovina. And another example would be to take the Croats living in Mostar in Bosnia, where there's a bridge known as having Bosniaks on the one side of the bridge and Croats on the other. During the war, this bridge was destroyed and then later rebuilt. However, Now when it is rebuilt, the emphasis on being Croats or being Bosniaks is stronger. So even if this bridge has been rebuilt, it could symbolize that Croats and Bosniaks are living together again. But there's something specific to the time after the war that has included the process of Bosniaks and Croats to build new cultural heritage that symbolizes or emphasizes the Croats or the Bosniaks. For example, the Croats have built an enormous cross up on the hill on their side, while Bosniaks have engaged in building new cultural heritage on their side to mark their territory. So one could say that there has changed a lot in the culture of being Bosniak. However, there are also some conflicting issues with this inside the community of Bosniaks. Some, for example, do not like the Wahhabi-style mosques and say that this is not typically us and we cannot have it this way, while others try to do it more subtly through marketing by using old pictures that were taken before the war to portray something of Bosnia as it is something that was taken before the war. Another change, according to language, has been that the use of Cyrillic and Latin alphabets have changed in Bosnia by excluding the Cyrillic alphabet because it is associated more with the Serbs rather than being something from the Bosniaks. And by looking at the Croats, they have also changed the language by reviving old words that were typical for Croatia before the Yugoslav times, and they have also created absolutely new words after the war to signify themselves as differentiated from the Bosniak language, Bosnian. So as a conclusion, you could say that the Bosnian people that all the way from the Ottoman times have been living together and been like Bosnians together, while the religious spread has separated them and slowly developed through influences coming from the West and converting some of the Bosnians to Christians, which later came to be identified as Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Serbs, which oppressed the Bosnian Muslims. And then when the Bosnian Muslims wanted to have their own country as Bosnia, it was a problem and it was believed to be a threat against the Christian Serbs and Croats. So the war came, and now all of a sudden everybody wants to be their own. But what happened to those who fled the war from Bosnia? Well, many of them live displaced across the globe and have failed to return due to that this system of having three nationalities inside Bosnia is somehow still considered to be an active conflict. Even if there's a Dayton agreement and a political division between all nationalities, it's still problematic. And this drives people to not come back to Bosnia. Another interesting thing when it comes to Bosniaks is that throughout history they have been a religious minority living in a secularized society. So preceding their arrival in the West when fleeing the war has probably affected the identity of them as refugees, turning into a global diaspora existing in approximately 100 countries around the world. This has absolutely led to a cultural shock and diminished the social cohesion that existed between the refugees inside the Bosniak community. And due to the lack of social relationships and not going back to their own country, Bosnia, it threatens their identity and existence as Bosniaks, who might as well be turned into the new identity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, consisting of a problematic triad of Croat, Serbs and Bosnians trying to rule the same country on each of the nation's terms. And all of this is a consequence of the war that was initiated in 1992. So by creating this video, I want you to know who Bosniaks are, their history, and who they are today and why. This is important to know because if we do not know and forget about the Bosniaks and their cultural history, their identity and existence will be threatened, and this is why it's important to know who they are. Otherwise, they might as well just diminish as a minority group and disappear altogether, which was the ultimate goal of Serbs and Croats when fighting the Bosniaks during the war, through genocide and ethnic cleansing. Thank you for listening this far. I hope that you have learned something new about Bosniaks, and I hope that you understand why it is of importance to spread the word about Bosniak history, who they are, who they were, and who they became throughout history, and how religion plays a major role in constructing a community's identity, and how religion can act disjunctive in a community as Bosniaks, contemplating them as a threat against other communities of different belief. We should rather draw inspiration from how Bosniaks treated Christians during the time of the Ottoman. Let them live there, understand them, and respect each other during peace. This would be considered as good for everyone in democratic terms.